Man, just being here. I was a youth pastor for a decade, and now I work with older people, and I preach Sunday mornings. And can I be honest? I miss youth. I love the videos. I love the energy. Man, one of the things that I really miss about my youth is competitive sports. I love playing sports. How many people love sports in here? But you can see, I didn't actually hit the DNA jackpot. I'm too vertically challenged to play my favorite sport, basketball. How many of you guys like basketball? That's your favorite, man, one of your favorite. Man, who's the best, greatest, LeBron or Jordan? How many LeBron? Jordan. Yeah. Man, I love boxing, but I have too pretty of a face to mess it up with boxing. And then America's sport is football. Like, man, I love football, love the Cowboys. I came in here, love the Cowboys sign in there. But I was just too slow to play football. But I wanted to be in sports. I love competing. I love beating up people. So I joined high school wrestling. And here's the thing about wrestling. You compete against people your own weight and size. And it's awesome. Learned so many moves with that. I love UFC, all that stuff. But I'll never forget my first varsity wrestling match. Man, I started a little bit late. I started my freshman year, and I worked up through the C team and then junior varsity. And I was doing well in junior varsity. So it was my freshman year. And here's my team. Our school was the 4-time district champs. And we were always one of the top teams in the entire state. And I was wrestling behind the 3-time state champion. His name was Sean Abrams. He was undefeated for 3 straight years. Nobody beat him. But guess what happened? Sean Abram got sick. So I had to step up with the first varsity match of the year against one of our rivals. And I was wrestling 130 pounds. You're like, Pastor B, you don't weigh 130 pounds. Yeah, that's before I discovered tacos and Texas barbecue. But I used to be 130 pounds way back in the day. That was 25 years ago. But I remember having to wrestle for Sean Abrams, our first match. It was intimidating. To add to the pressure, it was the first district match of the year, and we hadn't lost a district match in 5 years. I was so nervous. I couldn't sleep the night before. And when it came to the match, I had butterflies in my stomach. My hands and legs were cold. I was numb. I had a cotton mouth. My heart was beating inside my chest. How many of you guys played some sports and you kind of felt that feeling? And when the match started, I looked at the dude that I was about to wrestle. He was a full-grown man. He was as furry as a grizzly bear. And I was still going through puberty, right? So it was like, how am I going to, we locked up and I wrestled and I got rug burns from how furry the dude was. I'm like, dude, and we started wrestling throughout the match and I thought I could beat him. But before you know it, he took me down. I was counting all the lights on the gym ceiling because all the time I spent on my back. I was getting rolled. I was getting beaten up and we're about to lose. I'm like, oh, Lord. Plus, the cute chick that I liked came watch me wrestle, and I was getting destroyed. But I remember it was the 3rd round, and Coach McCurney yells at me. He's mad. He yelled some stuff I can't yell in a sermon, but he's like, bleep, 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 bleep. But then I remember, this is what I remember. He says, Benito, remember what I've taught you. Remember back to basics. And then he told me this. Bleep! You've been wrestling Sean bleeping Abrams every day in practice. This punk can't handle you. And like something went out, like, man, I've been wrestling the 3-time state champ every day in practice. He's rolling me, of course. But he's not as good as this guy. I just had like a sense of pride and kind of I could take this guy. All of a sudden, he says, on the bottom, this is what I want you to do. I want you to, how many wrestlers? Is there wrestling over here? Yeah. I was on the bottom. He says, what should I do? Get control. He says, pick up. And then all of a sudden, what I want you to do, I want you to shoot a single leg. I want you to take him down. Then I tight waist and I cross face grab and I pin that homie right there. And that chick that I invited was like, whoa. And it was the first of many matches that I won. But here's what I needed to do. I needed to be reminded of who I was and the calling that I had. I needed to be reminded of the basics in my life. And today I want to go to a story. You guys have heard it. It's the Battle of Jericho. And the beginning of the story, what God's going to do is God is going to once again remind Israel who they are. So if you have your Bible, turn with me to chapter 5. How many of you guys have heard the story of the Battle of Jericho in Sunday school growing up? This big wall was over the fortified city. But I want you to notice some odd battle preparations that I'm sure your Sunday school teacher didn't teach you about this story. It's in chapter 5, verse 2. At that time, the Lord said to Joshua, make flint knives and circumcise the Israelites again. And every boy in here says, oh! So Joshua made flint knives and circumcised the Israelites at Gilboa Harath. But King James translates this, the hill of foreskins. Like, that's a place I never want to go. I never want to visit that here. Think about this. You're about to battle. You're about to go in battle. This is like getting knee surgery before the Super Bowl or the World Cup. Like, they're messing you up before you have to fight. And some of you are like, Pastor B, I don't know what circumcision is. If you don't know what circumcision is, Pastor Josiah, raise your hand right there. He will be happy to explain it to you in detail after service. Whatever you do, just don't Google image it. Just don't do that. But here's what happens. Circumcision was part of God's covenant with Abraham in Genesis 17. God tells Abraham to be circumcised and that all his future descendants should be circumcised as well on the 8th day. But what does circumcision mean exactly? It's an outward sign of an inward commitment to God. What it does, it symbolizes the cutting away of fleshly desires and a life lived after the flesh. See, one of the main problems we have as human beings is not just that we sin, but sin is part of us. It's part of our desires. It's inside of us. Like, there are people that says, oh, man has been born good. Those people have never had a little brother or a little sister. Man, how many of you guys know little kids are evil? The smaller they are, like the first word they've ever learned is mine. And what's the second word? No. Like if you ever have a little brother or a little sister in here, like they would kill you if they were stronger, right? They throw toys at you. Like they're like a terrorist in diapers. These people are crazy. Like one thing that I've learned in life is this, that my daughter taught me that we're all sinners. My first daughter. My second daughter taught me this, that some of us are bigger sinners than others. And circumcision, this is what it meant. It was saying nothing will rule over my life except God. So in verse 2, God tells Joshua, make flint knives and circumcise the Israelites. I'm sure when Joshua heard this, he said, Lord, I'm not sure I heard you correctly, God. You said sharpen your swords, not make little stones, right? God says, no, I want you to make flint knives and do this covenant because I'm bringing you back and reminding you who you are. Here's something I want you to understand about this. The age that the Israelites lived in was the late Bronze Age. These weren't the caveman days. They had bronze and they had metal knives. So why flint knives? This is what I want you to do. This is one of the reasons we know the Bible is so powerful. You see, God's wisdom is this. A knife made out of freshly cut rock is absolutely sterile. Commentators say this. Freshly cut flint stone has the same sterile properties as a sterile scalpel because microorganisms and bacteria cannot live in a rock. So God, in his wisdom, before we knew anything about bacteria, would get flint knives instead of a metal knife that would bring them infection. And a freshly cut flint knife is what God would use to bring God's people back into covenant. But why would he do this? Look at verse 4. It says this. And now this is why God did so. All those who came out of Egypt, all the men of military age died in the wilderness on the way after leaving Egypt. And all the people that came out had been circumcised. But, notice this, all the people who had been born in the wilderness during their journey from Egypt had not. I don't know what happened. I don't know why they didn't, but this is my story. This is what I'm thinking. They got so discouraged. They thought God had begun to work in them. He was going to deliver them. But all of a sudden, they disobeyed and they're wandering in the desert and they're thinking like, why follow God? Why follow his commitments? Why even have our kids do it? It's not working. But what God is doing here, he's reminding a new generation of Israelites who they are, that they're the people of God, that they belong to the God of Israel, the great I am, that they follow God and not their fleshly appetites. And God is calling them back to a covenant in their lives. They haven't seen it yet. They haven't walked in it. They've been slaves, but God is bringing them into the promised land. And before we move forward in God's plan, before we move forward, we must look back and remember God's call in our lives. That's what they had to do. You are God's people. You don't live like the world. You don't follow the flesh. You don't follow the desires of your flesh. You have been set apart to follow God. And here's what I want to let you know. As you face your future, as you go on to the plans that God has for your life, the most thing that you got to constantly remember is that you're different. Just the fact that you're here, God has called you. He has put his purposes, he has put his plans on your life. And you must constantly remember over and over and over again that his calling is secure. See, and as we continue the story, he reminds them of that. It's the eve of the battle of Jericho. It's time for them to take the land. And as you can imagine, he's nervous. If you've ever done sports or taken a big test, you're nervous. War is imminent. Israel is armed and they're ready to fight. And Joshua is understandably having trouble sleeping. So he goes about and he takes a walk by himself. He's probably praying. He's thinking about the big day. And look what happens in verse 13. Now when Joshua was near Jericho, he looked up and he saw a man standing in front of him with a drawn sword in his hand. Joshua went up to him and asked him, "Are you for us or for our enemies?" Joshua was a bad man. I just want to say that. He's right at the enemy wall. He encounters a strange man with a sword in the dark. A lesser man like me, I would have pooped my pants and I ran back home. But not Joshua. He's not afraid. He goes over to that. Like Joshua is the John Wick of the Old Testament. He's like Jason Bourne. He's like Chuck Norris. This is a bad man. Like some people wore Superman pajamas. Superman wears Joshua pajamas. I heard that death once had a near Joshua experience. Like when the boogeyman goes to sleep every night, he checks his closet for Joshua. Like back in Israel, they had this Joshua brand of toilet paper, but it wouldn't take crap from anybody. This is Joshua. He's a tough guy. Nobody's going to mess with him. He's that guy. And look what it says. Joshua went up to him and asked him, "Are you for us or for our enemies?" But look at verse 14. Underline this. "Neither," he replied. It says, "The commander of the Lord, but as the commander of the army of the Lord, I have now come." And Joshua fell face down on the ground in reverence and asked him, "What message does the Lord have for his servant?" Look at verse 15. The commander of the Lord's army replied, "Take your sandals off, for the place where you're standing is holy." And Joshua did so. So who is this that Joshua encounters? Well, this text gives us clues. I want to give you 3 clues who this person is. First, he's called the commander of the army of the Lord. You know who that is reserved for? Jesus. Revelation 19, Jesus calls himself the commander of the Lord. Joshua worships him. Jews were not allowed to worship angels. The fact that he worshiped him shows us that it's God. And the third thing, he referred to him as Lord, which means is the word Kyrios, which means supreme authority. This is what theologians call a Christophany. It's an Old Testament appearance of Jesus in human form in the New Testament. This is Jesus showing up in the Old Testament. And here's the second thing: if you're going to have victory in your life, you got to realize that God's not my lieutenant, he's my commander. If you're going to win the battle, if you're going to be everything that God wants you to be, if you're going to win the victories in life, you need to have a clear chain of command. It's like the great theologian Carrie Underwood once said, "Jesus, take the wheel." Jesus, you're in charge. Victory comes through surrender. Let me tell you what I've understood in life. Being a Christian is not about getting God to fight my battles. It's not about God doing what I want him to do. Before every battle, before every plan, before everything that I do, you need to ask God, is this your plan for my life or is it my plan? And the victory that you're going to experience in your life only comes when we're fighting his battles. God doesn't call us, I know this sounds kind of counterculture, but God doesn't call us to follow our dreams, our desires, our passions. What Jesus calls us to do, he calls us to lay down our lives, to follow him, to give up our passions and say, "Follow me." And sometimes that's counterculture. Years ago, I had to say, "God, I'm tired of asking you to co-sign my dreams. Lord God, I'm tearing up my dreams." And what God, he uses a life. He says, "Okay, God, I'm coming up to follow your dreams." And what I have found, as I follow God in his terms, he will allow my dreams to follow me. And if you're going to follow God, if you're going to make a difference, you got to realize you are not the commander. You're the lieutenant taking orders from the almighty commander of the Lord's armies. And the reason we struggle, the reason we battle, the reason we have a life that is frustration is we don't understand command. So first of all, you see the call of God, and then you got a proper idea of the command that happens if you're going to follow the Lord. This is a victory plan if you're going to follow the Lord. The second victory lesson I want you to learn here is this. Public victories are the results of private visits with the Lord. He met God. He has a moment with the Almighty. There's nothing more powerful than a surrendered praying man or woman of God. I love the story of John Knox, the preacher and theologian from Scotland. History tells us Mary, the Queen of Scotland, was afraid of John Knox. In fact, in a famous statement she once made, she says this, "I fear the prayers of John Knox more than all the armies of Europe." Let me tell you what I've learned as I've walked with the Lord over my life. That I overestimated myself and I've underestimated God. And if I can go back and I talk to my 25-year-old self, my 15-year-old self, I would say, Benito, spend more time in prayer. I remember talking to one of my mentors, Dr. Royer, who'd been a missionary who planted literally hundreds of churches all over Brazil, in Utah among the Mormons, and in inner city. Literally, God used him. And I said, Dr. Royer, what has been the secret to God using you? And you know what he said? Prayer. And you know what I did as a young man, Josiah? I kind of dismissed it. No, there's got to be strategy. There's got to be education. And what I realized is prayer is the most important thing. See, notice what Joshua does. He pauses, he surrenders, and he worships, and he gets in God's presence. It's a defining moment. And I can show you the place in my house after serving God for years where I said, God, I'm no longer going to follow my dreams. I know I have all kinds of plans for ministry and what I want, but God, I am not the commander. You are. I am your lieutenant. Whatever you have for my life, lead me. And at that moment, I said, God, I'm going to follow you. And at that moment, God began to just allow his presence to come in my life. I remember it was a Thursday morning. I was in the office staff. And God's presence came, and I had a visitation with God. Let me tell you, you can visit the Lord. His tangible presence can come. Electricity was pulsating through my body. It was so strong I couldn't even stand. I was like I was nailed to the carpet. God's glory was so heavy upon me. And I felt like God saying, I am anointing you for a new season of ministry. Because I try to do ministry in my own strategy. I try to do it in my own strength. I try to do it by going to conferences. I try to do it by going to Bible college. I thought I could do all this, and I felt like God telling me, Benito, tell me when you're done doing it by yourself, because when you come to the end of yourself, you begin to walk in the beginning of what I can do. And then after that moment, I'm telling you, God did miracles. He started providing properties and multi-million-dollar buildings. And God started sending people. We've seen Hindus come to faith. We have over 35 people in our church from different nations. 35 different nations in our church. Our church looks like 31 flavors. I'm so thankful for that. How could God use a little boy from New Mexico whose mom used to clean houses, who never saw a white person until he went to Texas? Man, I've never even saw that, but yet God called me, and He called me to lead a multi-ethnic church in one of the fastest growing cities in America because of one reason. I decided, Lord, I'm not in charge. You're in charge, and I need to get into your presence. I need to know you, not just in a worship service, not just on a Sunday morning, not just in a youth service, but God is looking for somebody that's going to have a private visitation with God, that's going to lead to public victories in his life. Will you take that time? And Joshua 6:1 says, now the gates of Jericho were securely barred because of the Israelites. No one went out and no one came in. Then the Lord said to Joshua, see, I have delivered Jericho into your hands, along with its kings and its fighting men. But I want you to notice what's in there. There's still a king, there's still a ruler, and there's still fighting men. So there's going to be a fight. So here's the fourth victory lesson. If you're not ready to face opposition, you're not ready to be used by God. Jericho was the most fortified city in the world at that time. It had walls, it had a ruler, and they had people to protect it. And if you're going, if they're going to give up their city, they're not going to say, "Oh, Joshua, take the city. Joshua, walk in the promises of God." Guess what Joshua had to expect? He had to expect a fight. And let me tell you, when you begin to take hold of God's plans for your life, when you begin to walk in the call of God for your life, the enemy's not just going to let you have it. He's like, "Oh, go ahead." You're going to face a battle. It's not going to be easy. There's going to be an opposition because there's a ruler there and there are fighting men there. And some of us, you've experienced this. You said, "God, I'm going to follow you with all my life." And all of a sudden, the girl that never paid attention to you, that boy that never even noticed you, all of a sudden likes you. They want to date you. I mean, you know they're bad news, but they're cute. Like why? Like, Lord, how come now that I get serious with God, he or she's going to notice me? There's a fight. Or all of a sudden, you're hanging out, you're going to be suddenly invited up. They never invited you to parties before. You're always like, "What are you doing on Friday night?" "Nothing. Bored." But when you start getting close to God, you can get invitations. You can get people that are going to invite you to different things. You're going to make sports teams and athletic teams, and there's going to be a challenge. Where you say, "You know what, I'm going to fast and pray that day." And they bring tacos. And they're offering them for free. Or your friend offers to pay for McDonald's, and they never offer to pay for anything. You say, "You know what, I'm going to start tithing." And all of a sudden, Jordans go on for sale, and I need to buy those. Why is it that when we go after God's plan, all hell breaks loose? You know why? Because you're taking enemy territory. And when you're taking enemy territory, notice this, every inch of kingdom property is going to be contested by the enemy. So let me tell you, if you're going to fight Jesus, if you're going to follow Jesus, expect opposition. Expect that it's going to be hard. Expect a battle. Sometimes you might take 2 steps forward and it seems like you're going 3 steps back and you wonder, "Lord, what am I doing wrong?" Let me tell you, maybe you're not doing anything wrong. Maybe the reason things are going crazy is because your spiritual enemy, the devil, is trying to resist you. So let me give you some advice. Don't cry about it. Don't complain about it. Man, don't get down. Don't give up. Pick up your big boy panties and keep on moving forward with a smile on your face. Don't let him rob your joy. Don't let him rob your purity. Don't let him rob your calling. Man, say, "I'm here to fight. I'm here to take God's plan and purposes for my life. I'm called by God." Here's the 5th victory lesson that we get here. What God says is more reliable than what I see. I feel specifically for some of you, this is your point. The Lord said to Joshua, if we can put that verse 2 up. In verse 2 it says this, "The Lord said to Joshua, 'See, I've delivered Jericho into your hands, along with its king and fighting men.'" Could he see it? All he saw was a huge wall. All he saw were giants and a king in that land. God gives Joshua a battle plan that's ridiculous. The dumbest battle plan ever. I'd be so mad at God if he gave me that battle plan. Remember, if said, march around it once a day for 6 days. And then on the 7th day, march around it 7 times. What you're going to do, you're going to shout. Now, can you imagine being in that battle plan? Can you imagine being one of the soldiers? "What do we do, Joshua? We're ready. We got our flint knives. We're ready to go." No, so what we're going to do? We're going to march around there. What's happening? Nothing. So we're going to do the 2nd day. I'm going to march around there. What's happening? Nothing. Like if I'm God and I'm designing this miracle, I'm doing it like the old school game of Tetris. How many of you guys ever seen that old school game of Tetris? It's old school. And what you do, you play this game, and with everything you complete, it's kind of one brick falls. Then I'm like, 1st day, it falls. 2nd day, it falls. But no. 3 days, marching around, nothing happens. 4 days, marching around, nothing happens. 6 days, marching around, nothing happens. 7 days, 7 times, marching around, nothing is happening, and there is no doubt, there's people saying, like, "What is Joshua? He is losing it. Like, this guy's an idiot. Like, he ate too much tacos last night. That wasn't God." But let me tell you, circling is not about wasting time. It's about trusting God when it doesn't make sense. I can imagine the soldiers on the seventh day, this isn't working. What an idiot. Really? The wall's going down? Bro, it's right there. Open your eyes. But what God says is more reliable than what we see. Let me tell you, in your life, you can't judge what you see right now by what God is doing around you. The greatest miracle is not what God is going to do outside for you to see in the natural, but what is God is doing inside of you in the supernatural. And many times in life, and if you're going to walk with God, let me tell you, I know this isn't good popular preaching, but it's good preaching. You're going to have circling seasons. You're going to have seasons like, oh, Lord, I'm following you in school. I'm praying for my parents and they're not getting saved. Lord, I'm praying for a relationship and, Lord, nobody notices me. God, I'm believing you for this and where are you? Let me tell you, Josiah, there's going to be some circling seasons as you follow God. There's going to be moments where it feels like you're going nowhere. One of those circling seasons for me is, I remember when I went, that God called me to Austin to plant a church in the most unchurched city in all of Texas. You can drive 35 in Austin and you will not see a single church off the highway. People go down there to lose faith. The University of Texas. And I felt like God, at the moment I was a youth pastor, God was doing amazing things. Hundreds of kids in my youth ministry. And all of a sudden God calls me to go to Austin, Texas. And what I'm doing is I'm struggling. I'm working 5 jobs. I can't afford anything because, man, a church planner, that means basically that's a nice way of saying you're homeless and unemployed. You got no money, you got no job, you're struggling. God had put big dreams in my life. And I remember we would show up for church, we do events, nobody showed up. We planned events and waited, nobody shows up. We get ready for church, we're like, oh, is anybody? No, it was a rat back there. Nobody was even coming to church. And I remember on Monday mornings, I was feeling so discouraged. I would drive to my security officer job and a substitute teacher in a 1991 Sentra that I bought for $750 with a sagging roof. And I would pray every day. It would just make it to work. And I put my hands on there and literally it would just crust up every time the steering wheel was falling off. I remember when I bought the car, my wife said, did you make sure to check it for dead bodies if there's anybody in the back? And if I would think to myself, if I would fast forward my life to the moment, Josiah, when I left Bible college at 22 years old with a call of God, being Mr. Southwestern, and all these things that God had placed in my heart, and if I would have looked at 22-year-old Benito, would have gone to 32-year-old Benito, I said, what happened in my life? Like, how did I mess up? Why am I here? Why am I so frustrated? But here's what I want you to know. It's not what God is doing around you. It's what God is doing in you. I'm walking in the promises of God. God is building me up. He's building fortitude. He's building grit. He's building strength. He's building purpose in life because God was getting ready to do something. And if God was getting ready to do something in me, I had to learn to trust Him. Trust Him when it doesn't make sense. Trust Him on Friday night when everybody else is going partying and you don't have a boyfriend or a girlfriend and you're saying, God, I want that, but I'm wanting to follow you and you're tempted to maybe try a relationship on yourself. Trust Him. Trust Him when the door's not opening for that career. Trust Him. Trust Him when you don't feel like where you want to be at is what God has for you. Because here's what I know. God moves slowly before He acts suddenly. And that our graduallys lead to our suddenly. I didn't realize that step after step after step after step would lead to obedience. And now, they literally bought a property that we sold, made $2 million on that property, and ultimately they gave us another property, and we're getting ready to build a brand new, amazing building right off 35. I didn't see it when I'm driving my 1991 Nissan Sentra as nobody's coming, but God is saying, Benito, if you can trust me here, I can get you there. Here's the problem. We have a hard time trusting there. I couldn't see it. And I said, God, I trust you with my relationships. And I'm going to want to go to Southwestern, I'm not going to date. I know there's a lot of cute honeys here, but I'm not going to date. I'm going to trust you. And all of a sudden I said, Lord, I'm going to say no. And then all of a sudden, Lord brings in, whoa, cutest girl I've ever seen. And after 3 years of not dating, and I'm trusting Him, God allows me to marry the love of my life. And we've been married 24 years now. Can you trust Him? Can you trust Him when you don't see it? Can you trust Him in your relationships? Can you trust him when you're circling? Because let me tell you, if you're following Jesus, you're going to have some circling moments in your life. Maybe you're in it right now. Where you're following God, you're praying, you've taken the step of faith, and all you see is a wall in front of you. But let me tell you what I realized: God never wastes a step of faith. Never. Here's the last point. Outcome is God's responsibility. Obedience is my responsibility. And that seventh day of marching, they marched 7 times. Look what verse 20 says. When the trumpet sounded, the army shouted, and the sound of the trumpet, when the men gave a loud shout, the wall collapsed. So everyone charged straight in, and they took the city. This is not 2 bricks fell off and they climbed over. This is not some freak weather pattern came and the strong wind blew the wall down. It was obvious God did this. Everyone knows. Only God. I want you to realize nobody congratulated them. Oh, but you shouted awesome. I love the way you marched. You blew the horn incredible. There wasn't awards given away for the best marchers. Everyone knew that God delivered Jericho to the hands of the Israelites. It was about him. And if God's going to use you to your full capacity, he's got to bring you to the place where only God can put somebody in a stage like that. Only God can give them that job. Only God can give them that marriage. Only God. But how do we get there? Obedience. We position ourselves for a miracle with our normal, ordinary, everyday obedience. There's one thing that I want to let you know. We just don't walk up and say, oh man, I'm pastoring the church I always wanted to pastor. It's every day, moment by moment, day by day steps that'll lead you to one day walking in his promises. See, I love movies. Told you last night. My favorite movies are Rocky 3, Rocky 4, Rocky 5, 300, and Gladiator. And Gladiator contains one of my favorite lines in any movie. I shared it last night. It says, brothers, what we do in this life echoes in eternity. But the actual plot chronicled around one of the most savage periods in all of human history. In that movie, we saw how bloody and barbaric and inhumane the games really are. Why do I like it? Pray for me. I don't know. But let me tell you how those games really ended. In the 4th century, there lived an Asiatic monk who spent most of his life in a remote community tending a garden and cooking soup. Then one day, this little monk, whose name was Tamilicus, felt God call him to Rome. The capital city, the busiest, wealthiest city in the whole world. Tamilicus had absolutely no idea why God wanted him to go there. He was terrified of the thought of going, but as he prayed, he felt it was unmistakable. He was supposed to go. He was supposed to obey God. So he went. Went from his little remote city, put all his belongings in a little sack on his back, with everything he owned, and he found Rome. As he walked into Rome, he saw this incredible building, the largest building he had ever seen. It was the Roman Colosseum. What he didn't know was the crowd was going to see the gladiator contest. Tamilicus joined them, not knowing what he was doing or why he was going to, but what God was up to. He just knew he had to obey. He felt the sense of the Spirit to go to the games. So he went on to the top of the rafters. He took the seat in the Roman Colosseum, and he saw the great warriors march in and turn to the emperor and say, "We who are about to die salute you." Tamilicus thought, we who are about to die salute you? What does that mean? It didn't take much time for the little monk to realize the huge crowd had come to cheer men on to murder one another. As the game started, and horror, it all hit them, how depraved and how disgusting these games were. Out of reflex, out of reaction, he shouted from his seat, "In the name of Jesus Christ, I plead you to stop. In the name of Christ, stop." The fighting, of course, began. Nobody heard the cries of the little monk. Tamilakis was in reaction mode. He wasn't even thinking. He ran down the stone steps into the sandy stage of the Colosseum. And as he was walking down there, he would continue to say, "In the name of Christ, stop! In the name of Christ, stop! In the name of Christ, stop!" Everybody thought he was part of the entertainment. They put little Tamilakis, they batted him around. They thought, "Oh, this is funny." Maybe he was just part of the entertainment, like a little clown coming on the stage. But he kept doing it over and over again till it wasn't funny anymore. And the crowd, annoyed by little Tamilakis, they began to chant, "Run through him! Run through him!" So a gladiator took out his sword and did just that. He slashed a blade into the stomach of the little monk. And before he died, with blood bursting through his body, Tamilakis said once again, "In the name of Christ, stop." Then history tells us a strange thing occurred. As the gladiator who had killed him just stood and stared at him, the crowd focused on the still form of his lifeless body on the sandy floor. The arena grew deathly quiet. And it was as if all of a sudden, in a holy moment, everybody realized at one time this was not part of the entertainment. This was real. And the sudden horror of the moment became clear to everybody. In silence, people began to leave the top of the rafters. People began to leave the bottom of the rafters. Slowly but surely, everybody began to exit the great Roman Colosseum. And after several minutes, the Colosseum was empty. And that was the last gladiator contest in the history of the Roman Colosseum. Never again did men kill each other in that arena because little Tamilakis changed history. It happened as he simply obeyed. Obedience is my responsibility. Outcome is God's responsibility. And what I'm saying this morning, there's history changers in this room. I'm looking at a bunch of them. But it only happens through radical obedience to the one who is worthy of it all. And you're going to live your life, and you're not going to see it. You're not going to realize as all your friends are inviting you to school, are inviting you to party, and girls and guys are trying to get together, and everybody's having sex. We say, "No, I'm going to honor the Lord with my sexuality." You don't realize that that moment of obedience is going to set you up to walk into a holy marriage that's going to last for years because of the foundation that you lay. You don't realize as your partner, because the most important decision that you make other than following Jesus is who you marry. Make sure you find somebody, not that just looks good, not that just that you like, not that just dresses cool, but that loves Jesus. I tell my girls all the time, 2 requirements if you're going to bring a boy home. Make sure they love Jesus. Second requirement, make sure they love Jesus more than you. Find somebody that loves Jesus. And we didn't know that we would be following the Lord and just going to Southwestern Assemblies of God University. We'd be growing and learning and obedience and training and equipping. And we take this position and that position. That we'd sell everything and we'd leave jobs that were comfortable and we'd step little by little. Those moments of obedience, because one day you're going to take a step. And you're going to take a step, and you're going to take a step. And like little Tamilakis, one day you'll be standing in the moment and you'll realize that marriage is back together. That Hindu has come to Christ because of your obedience. That missionary has been funded because of your obedience. There are camps that are speaking because of your obedience. That your obedience changes history. Every one of us, as we obey God every day, and many times it looks like we're going nowhere. Let me say, most of the time it looks like we're going nowhere, but every once in a while, as you continue to obey, you'll be in the arena that God has you, like Tamilakis, and history will be changed. And maybe I came here where there's that one person that would say, I am going to follow him in every area of my life. I'm going to obey him, even when it doesn't make sense. Because I know for some of you, the Spirit of the Lord right now, I sense it is stirring in you. It's jumping in you. And I want to obey my God. And if you would obey him, you will look back and you'll say, wow, God, I can't even believe that you did that through me. Because he's not looking for ability. He's looking for availability. But radical availability from obedience. Every head bowed, every eye closed. Oh, Lord. Sense your Spirit in this place, Holy One. Lord, I've done my best with my feeble words to challenge a generation to live for you. Now, Holy Spirit, would you move? Would you call? Would you stir? Would you empower? Would you put desire in your sons and your daughters to live for you? To say, in the midst of the opposition, in the midst of everything, I'm going to follow you. Maybe you're here and you say, Pastor, I want to obey him with everything that I have. Every day. Every day. Every moment. Even when it doesn't make sense. I'm all in. I trust him with my future spouse. I trust him with my career. I trust him with my calling. I trust him.